Tonight I'm drinking red wine in addition to my usual double cappuccino because I've been doing some deep research into tonight's episode. Tonight we're asking a question, true or false? The calling of a winemaker is as sacred and holy and high as any prophet, priest, or king. Whichever way you answer that question, you'll find tonight's episode to be challenging and revealing as we speak with Skype guest Dyson DeMara, the owner of Oregon's oldest winery, Hillcrest, in the Umpqua Valley of Oregon, and we explore what it means to be called to be thunderstruck, as well as to find the work of our soul in the soul of our work. We like to start out with a scripture that kind of focuses our conversation, and tonight we actually have two short ones from the Gospel of Matthew. Tracy, you want to take us into our Pneuma reading for this evening?
The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. And from Matthew chapter 21. What do you think? A man has 2 sons. He went to the first and said, "Son, go and work in the vineyard today." He answered, "I will not." But later he changed his mind and went. The father went to the second and said the same, and he answered, "I will go, sir." But he did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of the father? They said, "The first." Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are going into the kingdom of heaven ahead of you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes believed him. And even after you saw it, you did not change your minds and believe him."
Before getting to Dyson, just wanted to comment on, kind of frame this passage. Oftentimes we find a sense of call in life through those intuitions or insights that catch us off guard or overwhelm our senses sometimes. Sometimes it may be through a conversation we've had with someone, or a piece of art we're looking at, or a piece of music we're listening to, and suddenly something clicks into place and we find our marching orders for the future anyway. It overwhelms us. Artists are called into the artist path, winemakers into the winemaking path, ministers into ministry paths and such. Oftentimes those decisions are just simply not rational decisions. They come from deep within when the soul recognizes its place in the world and what brings it most fully alive. But as Jesus observes, we don't always necessarily follow that path that brings us most alive, that gives us greatest joy. And part of the reason, I think, at least in my own experience, is that when we get a sense of where our soul wants to be, we also get a sense that it's going to ask everything of us, that it's something we're so strongly attracted to that we know that we will turn aside from other attractions, that we will be devoted in ways that perhaps we're not quite ready to be devoted to. As Jesus observed, it's like that person who finds that incredible treasure and hides it in a field and then sells everything he has to buy that field. Or the person who finds that pearl of great price and sells everything in order to have that. He's talking about our calling, our sense of what brings us most fully alive in this world. But sometimes the terror of leaving our old life behind is a bit overwhelming. I know in my own path, I was kind of like the son in that second scripture passage who was asked by the father to do something, where, in a sense, to retranslate, found that spark, that was thunderstruck and just discovered this path that surely promised to be a path of aliveness, but to go into the ordained ministry. But I had never considered going to the ministry before, and quite frankly, it scared the hell out of me. I thought all ministers at the time were pretty much crazy people and sadomasochistic, and I'm not so sure that I wasn't correct in that original assumption. But bottom line is, I felt the call, but I said no, and I ran. I enrolled in a secular college, majored in economics, trying to steer myself as far away from the ministry as possible. And it wasn't until 4 years later, nearly 4 years, that my hell no turned into a heaven's yes. What changed that? Well, it was 30 French ballerinas that changed it. In 1985, I was on my way to study in Nantes, France for a semester in my junior year, and I wound up before reaching Nantes in a small town along the Loire River called Chinon. And in Chinon, I was on a student budget, so I found myself in a hostel for about $10 a night, and the hostel was attached to the French version of a YMCA, and right outside my room was the gymnasium, in fact, for that YMCA. And I was all alone in my room. It was January. Nobody was touring France at the time. And that night, I had a vivid dream, a dramatic dream, in fact. It was a dream of biblical proportions. Quite literally, I dreamt of Isaiah's vision in the temple in Isaiah 6, where he's standing in the temple in the Holy of Holies, and the holiest place in the Jewish temple, where God was thought to be invisibly enthroned. And God's presence in Isaiah's vision is so great that the fringe of God's garment fills the entire temple. This huge vision, and this smoke is filling the temple, and there are these winged seraphs flying around, shouting, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God Almighty," from which we get the song, the hymn. And it was the most beautiful sound coming from these seraphs I'd ever heard in my life, and in my dream I was just transfixed. Well, as I awakened from this dream, I discovered that the sound that I was hearing in my waking state continued from my dream. I was still hearing these amazing seraphim, only I realized as I began to kind of awaken that it wasn't seraphim at all that I was hearing. I was hearing the jibber-jabber of little French children right outside my door. Now, the talk of any children in any language is beautiful, but there's something about French language and French children. When they're talking and they're jibber-jabber, they don't just talk, they half talk, half sing. And it is to this day the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. And I was so caught up in the sound and just the peace and the flow of it all that without hardly even realizing it, I got up out of my bed, crossed over the room, opened the door just to figure out what were these children doing. Well, I opened the door and there were 30 little young ballerinas all in blazing red tutus, just like right out of a Degas painting. And they suddenly, one of them stopped and looked at me, pointed and said, "Ooh la la, son pige," or "Look at that, his pajamas." And they all burst out laughing. And suddenly I realized, oh my gosh, I'm in my pajamas in front of all these girls. Slammed the door behind me, can't believe what I just did, and then laid down in that bed again. Their jibber-jabber continued, then resumed, and once again I found myself just in this incredible state of peace and joy. This liquid joy that was just exuding from these girls was filling my consciousness. And as it filled my consciousness, I found my thoughts drifting to thoughts about being a minister, that calling that I had been running from so hard for almost 4 years. And for the first time, as I contemplated what it would be like to be a minister, I felt the joy, and the joy was not met by immediate terror, but it just stayed in the state of liquid joy. And in that experience, I was thunderstruck again. I can't believe it. I actually could conceive myself doing this thing. And from that point on, I resolved to go to seminary. Dyson DeMara, who is about to join us, has his own story of being thunderstruck, and we'll be exploring that and what also makes a profession truly sacred or soul work.
Richard Summers was the first to set his winemaking roots in the land of Umpqua, and in the process became a pioneer to Oregon's fledgling wine industry. Despite warnings from his UC Davis educators that wine grapes wouldn't grow in Oregon, Summer planted 36 acres of California vinifera, establishing Hillcrest Vineyards as the state's first commercial vineyard and winery in 1961. Today, Hillcrest Vineyard is owned and operated by Dyson DeMara and his family, carrying on the grand traditions established by Oregon's oldest winery and vineyard. Like Summers before him, DeMara is also a pioneer of sorts, giving up the comfort and stability of a trade marketing and education career with Napa Valley's Robert Mondavi Winery to go into business for himself. Hillcrest specializes in small lot wines. Each is handcrafted, employing old world winemaking traditions. The DeMara family still harvests grapes from a nearby vineyard originally planted by Summer, just as they continue to produce the quality Riesling, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Pinot Noir Hillcrest is known for.
Our connection goes back a few summers ago. I was in Oregon and I tasted some wine that was the best Cabernet Franc I'd ever tasted. And it was while I was in Bandon, Oregon. My brother-in-law served it to me. And it was this bottle here, in fact, with a strange name. It's called Nonich. And I said, "Where's this wine from?" And they said, "Oh, Hillcrest Winery." And so we went and visited Hillcrest, about 90 minutes away, and there was Dyson. And you'll know why we have him on the program once he starts talking. But I asked Dyson, why was this name of this wine so strange, Nonich? You want to tell us why you called it Nonich, Dyson?
I'm, like you, have been inspired by many things, and occasionally in one's life as it pertains to wine, you're touched in a very almost spiritual way. I've had I can name those bottles and who was there when we had them and what we were eating and wearing and this. And one of those wines was from a variety that you mentioned, very little Cabernet Franc, that is one of the most noble of noble grapes, from the very fine wine area you were talking about, spending the night in the little village on the Loire of Chinon in the Loire Valley of France. And so Nonich is Chinon is a protected name that cannot be used by anyone, and I made this wine very much in this French style. So Nonich, for those of you, probably many of you figured it out, is actually Chinon reversed.
Chinon reversed. You have been in the wine field now for some time. What got you into wine to begin with?
Like many things I think that are very kind of eventful in someone's life. It's not something you go looking for, and this definitely was the case with wine. I was raised in a family that for religious reasons did not drink wine, and I was around people that drank wine occasionally that my parents would entertain. But I happened to be my freshman year in college in Southern California and met a young lady who's now my wife of many years. But we had been dating about 6 months, and she had decided, she later on became a chef in this, went to cooking school, cooked in Napa and San Francisco, but she decided she wanted to have a 6-month anniversary dinner at the end of our freshman year. And so she took over a friend's condominium and prepared a meal, and little did I know that her mother had sent down a bottle of wine from Napa Valley, and her parents did not drink wine, or were not really into wine and food at that point. And this bottle that she sent down, my wife prepared what was a very beautiful dinner at that point. But this wine, when I tasted it, it was beyond any beverage I'd ever had.
So you had this sip of this Cabernet from the Napa, and it just kind of blew open a whole other world for you, huh?
So I went to pursue what was this, and I remember walking in. I was only 18 years old, mind you, at this point, but I walked into a liquor barn, which was a very large wine emporium in Southern California, and inquired from a gentleman about Cabernet Sauvignon in this, and was mesmerized that it was a very simple old process of bringing, grapes that we're all familiar with, but bringing grapes in, fermenting them, yet it had been transformed into something that was magical to me at that point as well as today.
So what makes wine magical in your opinion?
That I cannot tell you, and therefore it was magic. And many winemakers, people enter wine business for different reasons, but Wine is something to me that it's one of the greatest gifts. It's a fantastic connection to nature, to history, and this kind of thing. But sometimes it's just kind of the hedonistic pleasure that sense of smell for myself, and I think for most, is the strongest trigger of emotion that there is. And occasionally, we'll smell something such as a grandma's basement at an estate sale or something that reminds us of grandma's basement, and those emotions flood back. And like I said, I had no wine experience, but smelling and tasting this wine brought this emotion to the surface.
Wine, as with any gift in life, can be abused, and we find plenty of examples of alcohol being abused. Dyson's own family, for religious reasons, didn't drink wine, so that's an interesting actually tension in his own path of growing up in a household that didn't drink wine for religious reasons, and then becoming a winemaker. In fact, to this day, his parents have not tasted a glass of the wine that he produces. But as many people who love and to experience wines over time will tell you also, is that to drink wine like the kind that Dyson produces and advocates drinking, it's not about getting a high. It's about actually like studying a great work of art. If you stand before a great painting and you are distracted or you're out of control, you're not really enjoying that great painting. And so likewise with wine, if you are drinking that to the point of drunkenness or addicted, you're no longer actually enjoying the very values that drew you to the wine itself. One can think about a lot of other areas in life where that's the case too, even areas of life where we don't consider them addictive. How about our television watching or movie watching, and how about the ways we engage in conversations with others? So there's all kinds of ways to be addictive. There's all kinds of ways to abuse the very processes that have come to us as gifts. Wine obviously is one of those that can be abused like any other. Once he experienced that kind of mind-blowing experience of that Cabernet, and realizing that he kind of drunk wine before, but it was all kind of cheap box wine or what have you. But when he actually truly tasted something that was an artistic product, it just opened up a whole other world. And now that happens to many of us. In fact, my junior year of college, that happened to me. But I didn't become a winemaker. But for Dyson, it hit him where he lived, and it wasn't simply about drinking alcohol, or some amazing taste, but it was truly the wine brought together an evening with a fellowship with friends too, and inspired the conversation. And then he wanted to know more about wine, and so he started researching. And the more he researched, the more he realized this one glass of wine is really, there's a whole universe in here. It's about a conversation in a particular place, at a particular time of year, a conversation between the sun, the soil, the rains, the minerals within the soil. All these different things, they happen at certain times and under certain temperatures and different conditions. And therefore, every glass or every bottle or batch of wine is really distinctive. It's really the record of something that happened here on Earth, and it's a distinctive record that actually can't be precisely replicated in any other way. And what he also found as he began to continue his own enjoyment of wine was that it wasn't all simply about drinking what's the best bottle or expensive bottles or what have you, but rather he noticed that just simply the mere presence of a bottle of wine on a table really changes the conversation. It really brings who enjoy wine and food, together, and inspires that sense of fellowship. So you could actually have a not so great bottle of wine, but still you have this community being formed, and as you're ingesting this conversation that's taken place in the creation of the wine itself. And what I've found in Dyson's experience as I've examined it is that his interest in wine has gone then, there's already a suggestion that it goes beyond simply a personal, like, oh, I just like wine. He began to see the community aspects of it and the way that it brings people together. But he also noticed just the intimate relationship between the vines and the earth itself, and just how special a process it is, just the interaction between the vines and the earth to even produce the wine, which led him then into increasingly looking into environmentally sustainable techniques as he got into the winemaking, discovering that the wines actually do amazing things. For instance, the vines themselves, if they're simply heavily watered and given everything they need, all the nutrients they need, all the sun they need, and in perfectly full amounts of all that stuff, the wine actually comes out a bit thin, not very concentrated. What makes a wine truly concentrated and interesting and full of complex flavors is that the wine actually, the vines, have to be stressed at times. They actually have to be yearning for nutrients they're not quite getting. And what it does is it causes the vines then to shut out nutrients to certain areas of the vine and concentrate the nutrients into the fruit. And so interesting, he started noticing there's principles of life here too. Interesting that, we talk about at Darkwood Brew, for instance, heaven is found in the here and now, in the heart of our struggles, not merely in the absence of them. Here is a perfect metaphor of that coming from nature itself. He noticed that also that just how the seasonality of wine or the vines are really quite inspiring and artistic in and of themselves. There are times of the year, for instance, when the wine, when it is stressed, it produces a certain chemical that actually doesn't taste very good, and in fact it's a warning signal. If animals eat it, it actually sends warning signals to them. And so, and actually, if the grapes are harvested too soon, then you taste this chemically taste, kind of vegetable-y taste. It's the product of being harvested too soon. But as the sunlight comes and shines on those grapes, then at a certain point of the process, it actually removes those chemicals, and then the fruit comes out again. I mean, there's just this little dance that's taking place between the vine, the sun, the water, and so forth, that is so artistic that the more he was interfering with the process through chemicals and so forth, the more he felt like he wasn't paying attention to nature itself. The nature itself had created the patterns, and our job is to listen to those patterns. Another interesting thing about winemaking in recent years is that is the advent of wine ratings. Have you ever been to the supermarket and you find, this wine's a 93 according to Wine Spectator, this is a 87 or what have you. And those wine ratings came out for good reasons. There's a lot of hype in the wine world, and you could have a bottle for $60 that might taste just as good as a $20 bottle or what have you. And it's confusing. You see all those bottles on the shelves, and you wonder, well, where do I put my money? So those ratings kind of helped level the playing field in a sense. However, as time went on, people noticed that, well, if a wine gets above a 90 rating, the price just goes way, way, way up. And yet the cost to make a bottle of wine, even an expensive bottle of wine, their product costs about $15, even for a Chateau Lafite Rothschild. So it's just really, it's quite remarkable. So if you can get a high rating, you can make a high profit. So wine producers started manipulating the processes of wine in order to suit the wine rater's taste, their specific taste, so they could constantly hit these high marks. So what happened was, while a lot of bad wine became better wine, a lot of the great wines that had their distinctive character, that where the winemaker had spent literally decades paying attention, following the natural processes of the relationship between the distinctive soil, the minerality of the soil, and so forth. They started manipulating these things so that all their wines would start tasting like a certain flavor profile. And so those ratings actually has served to create a whole lot of wines in the world where you literally can't tell, was this made in France or Argentina or Japan or the United States, because it all tastes pretty much alike in a certain range. There's some interesting life metaphors in that as well. All of us have a distinctive path, a distinctive calling in life that is revealed to us over time through our struggles as much as through our joys. And as we struggle, and experience joy in those combinations, more and more of what brings us most fully alive is revealed more and more. And so it's not about let's find the perfect career that will make the most money and I'm going to create this logical path to it, but really following a spiritual path is as much about listening to your life and your history and your path in the present moment as it is any kind of strategic planning. In fact, it's really not about strategic planning at all. It's really more about strategic faithfulness. That we don't simply try to create an image of ourselves that is a 95 rating, on somebody else's scale, and try to make our life meet that. But rather, each one of us has a particular setting in life, a particular history in life setting, and it's important to pay attention to that and to reflect that out. One of the things that Dyson noted in our previous conversation as we were preparing for this episode is that wine, in order to be truly interesting, actually has to have some flaws in it, or at least the grapes have to experience those stresses and strains. There has to be flaws in the path of making wine. Not too many, otherwise the wine really does taste bad. But if it has none, it's not going to taste that good. So it's about being flawed, but perfectly flawed. Having that right amount. And so likewise in our own paths. We each have these peculiarities in our personality quirks and interests that maybe other people aren't interested in and so forth. And that's part of who we are. Perhaps one could say that's part of how we were created to be. And that's not to give a pass to just anything we want to do. But it does mean that each of us, to be brought fully alive in this world, has a distinctive path that looks different from others. And sometimes others will find annoying even. And it also means that it's going to be, the path that brings us fully alive is not going to be one that simply is free of struggle. The struggles are intrinsic to the process. It's part of what gives us our distinctive flavor, our distinctive complexity.